Thanks a lot for your attention, friends. A very good day to you from different corners of the world. It is remarkable to witness human resilience to a pandemic as devastating as COVID. I hope you're taking good care of yourself and your loved ones. Now that my friend Ophelie has brought chicken skeletons out of the closet and chickens out from their graves, I will give a multi-scalar perspective about how these historical and current ecological and social relationships pan out in a rapidly changing world. Definitely, these two relationships are driven by anthropogenic activities. Out here on the screen, I've tried to depict how chicken, right at the center of this screen, with other livestock, are drivers of resilience of poor humans. Those of you who have read Marxist theory would be familiar with Frederick Engels' proposition on the relationship of poor with the livestock. Linking my talk further with the first session last month, you would recall this slide which discussed chicken production. So it is necessary that we focus on the journey from South Asian and South Asian wilderness to potentially every kitchen pot in the world over the next 30 years. It is furthermore important to note that 98% of future dominance of chickens in our kitchens would happen in South Asia and Africa, an aspect closely related with potential increase in per capita income, which reflects in per capita consumption of animal protein. This brings up the question of what would happen if the tables on per capita consumption are turned, as you can see on the screen. I would like to share some statistics about the ecological signature of chicken dominance from published records. In this PNAS article, Bar On and his colleagues have figuratively represented biomass continuation by multiple biomass constitution by multiple life forms. Graph A represents the overall picture, and the tiny lower triangle on the right-hand side represents the animal biomass on Earth. So in mere 10,000 years, humans have pumped more livestock biomass than wild mammals and humans themselves. Ecological relationships are primarily a game of numbers and biomass. If you recall the undergraduate modules on pyramids of number and pyramids of biomass. So let us contextualize it further in terms of something more relatable. And yes, one unit of GTC here represents 10 raised to the power 15 grams of carbon. And before I move to the next slide, focus on the tiny triangle of wild birds in the top right corner of figure B. On this slide, on the right pans, you have 2-decadal leap of growth rate in broilers, which you definitely would recall from the first session. And in about 50, 60 years, these broilers have thrice the growth rate of their wild cousins in Asia. So isn't it astonishing to note that our love for chickens has allowed them to dwarf the whole wild world of birds by about 3 times in terms of biomass? The closest rival to the broiler chickens would be passenger pigeons, who are estimated to have a population estimate of about 1.5 to 3 billions, as opposed to about the standing crop of 23 billion chickens, which was estimated in 2016, and which is increasing with each passing year. So in 2016, we slaughtered almost 70 billion of them for food. For biologists and people who like to link multiple perspectives, this should be a major food of thought, and this should provide perspectives which rings bell. the bell of threat. I guess we can talk for days about the social and ecological ramifications in isolation, which is the quintessential way in which we do research on chickens these days. So I would rather focus on areas where researchers have not yet explored the connections in the social and ecological domains, principally studied under socio-ecological systems in development economics. This session the sessions prior to my talk have already stressed on the expansions and homogenization of gene pools of chicken, something that threatens the wild stock in the protected areas. This homogenization has implications of diseases not only that impact humans, but also the wild poultry and other way around. This is how zoonotic and zoonotic diseases are exchanged across the human-animal barriers. Bird flu viruses are a prime example. Further, the talk would exemplify these aspects in great detail. So I don't know whether to call ourselves fortunate or unfortunate, but most of us here have either been part of or have been facing the consequences of Anthropocene epoch. So while you can check the details in the article by Bennett and colleagues on the global biomass dominance by the broiler chickens, later I would share perspectives that were missed in this vital paper. For my friends in the temperate regions, the enormity of coexisting numbers of humans and animals in tropical systems is mind-boggling. More often than not, it is due to the locally prevalent poor solid waste management, which serves as food subsidies for multiple species. Centuries of coexistence has given rise to social ecological relationships emanating extraordinarily impressive abundance of commensals. But even for a native like me in South Asia, during my undergraduate years, this mega congregation of about 10,000 black kites on Asia's largest landfill, pictured in the center, was breathtaking. Those were also the days when I learned about catastrophic declines in vulture population of Asia. Before kites, these landfills were occupied by vultures, and the major animal biomass on this landfill was also the meat product from slaughter markets, besides the ones which is coming from broiler chickens. So in last 30, 40 years, we have seen simultaneous decline number of vultures and simultaneous increase in the constituency of what chicken biomass would contribute in the slaughter remains. While chicken waste to commercial animal relationship, while chicken waste to commensal animal relationship is commonplace in global South, I wonder if you knew that socioeconomic status in Indian subcontinent designates what part of chicken you would get to eat. Interestingly, legs and entrails are discarded by rich, while in China, on the other hand, they're part of well-relished cuisines. My friends were discussing the aspects of antimicrobial resistance the other day, which takes special consideration into who eats what part of chicken in India, which would not be the case in China otherwise. And as well, how the chicken slaughter waste is used for culturing fishes in many parts of Eastern India, and also around the pisciculture units surrounding the national capital of Delhi, where I conduct a long-term study for over 10 years now. So the interesting aspect is the ways in which fishes from this pisciculture from distant lands are again shunted back to the city for local consumption. So this showcases how regional idea of consumption of chicken has ramifications at the scale of thousands of kilometers. In studies across the world, there is a major lacuna around what is left after the consumption of chickens that are raised in farms as well as backyards. While academic fraternity has a lot to catch up, the graph here represents ways in which chickens have increased their ecological footprint on the globe, leaving Rest of the livestock taxa behind. Possibly far from your imagination, there are industries associated with chicken feathers and guano as well for making sleeping bags and manure, respectively. Social ecological relationships are seldom associated with cultural aspects that you can read about in the manuscript that came out last year. But even however, after having spent more than 9 years studying urban ecology in and for the city of Delhi, I feel I have just scratched the surface. Even for the field biologists in the region, these spectacular eco-evolutionary events remain elusive. Contributing to these lacunae, I would discuss my current research purview, which explores dynamic urban speciality between people, animals, and chicken waste and other types of waste. Out here, the slide is a representative schematic for tropical urban systems, and you can appreciate the decadal changes in about 30, 40 years. This is how these cities change from areas which were not so built up and areas where we had a lot of solid waste in the streets suddenly see transformational changes. So these changes attribute to the pocket size of average person in the area and how much of animal protein a person consumes. So I'm discussing these aspects of biospheric signature of increase in the global footprint of chicken in terms of another major event in South Asia, also in many parts of Africa. For the uninitiated, with respect to this slide, the turn of 20th century hold special meaning in the global South. Unlike the Western cities like New York, Los Angeles, and similar cities which saw steepest urban immigration hundreds of years ago, cities like Delhi in oversaw quite recent urbanization events. So like the major urbanization started in 1980s onwards. In this context, the loss of vultures is just the tip of the iceberg, considering simultaneous loss of cultural identities of inland immigrants. The latter impacted how people perceived and associated with the steepest decline of a species that was so ubiquitous in South Asia, estimated at numbers somewhere around 40 million at one particular time. My major research uses black kites as a model species, which are arguably the most abundant raptors of the world. And I use this model species, which occupy most of these scavenging units in multiple cities of India after the loss of vultures in great numbers. These discussions hold special meaning while we are forced to interact virtually due to the impact of similar changes in human-animal relationships and its global ramification in the form of COVID-19. For the old world, the fastest decline witnessed in the vulture population should not be treated as a single isolated event from simultaneously occurring similar changes in human-wildlife interface and socio-economy. Such events are driven by, and in turn, further cascade urban growth and development that shapes the local culture, built environment, and social ecological processes. As we have increased chicken's footprint and have lost vulture from the system quite simultaneously, while using vital technologies and changes as part of urbanization, it would be interesting for you to know that fake news with respect to how we lost vultures in the region travels faster than COVID-19. For instance, many people in India believe that scientists from the US and Japan lured away the vultures from India to their countries using technology. Of course, there is no truth there, but technology surely allows human vulture disconnections in the event of extinction of experience, as encountering vultures in real life is not possible in most parts of South Asia and Africa these days. Thus, having tablets and internet spreads worse misconceptions that what mythologies have talked about, ability about vultures' ability to fly high and see thousands of kilometers apart, as depicted on the slide here. You must be wondering, why was I stressing the aspects of fake news? So while I did cover the aspect of affordability that allowed chickens to make a global footprint, the sheer commonness of chickens also makes the industry and associated people susceptible to fake news and misconceptions. The images above illustrate the fake news of chickens spreading corona in several parts of the world, corona to humans. So there are misconceptions in multiple parts of India and Pakistan that eating chicken can give you COVID-19. Incidentally, using the same picture of blistered chicken, people have used the WhatsApp University facility to distribute this fake news. If that was not enough, this kid in the lower right corner composed a song about the event that you can find on YouTube. The title roughly translates, "Hey Corona, look, the chicken has to lose its respect for you." Moving away from the lighter note, these fake news items have impacted the poultry industry of all sizes multiple times in the last 2 decades. My own parents suggested me on phone not to eat chicken during COVID to avoid getting the disease. If that was not all, the industry was also impacted in January this year by avian influenza, robbing many people in South Asia of their jobs and causing loss of capital. This is a picture, any typical chicken market in South Asia, where many of these units come to abrupt halt due to spread of fake news with respect to what chickens can give to human beings. The final 2 slides of my talk would now move away from the regional lens to contextualize the impacts of what chickens mediated reconfiguration of biosphere means for the new world, so for the non-human world. If you are familiar with the bird migration flyways that millions of birds use while wintering in relative southern latitudes, you would appreciate the multiple color bands out here, which represent the continental scale flyways from this article by Zhu and colleagues. If you focus on the Indian subcontinent, from which I recently discussed the importance of Central Asian flyway, you would notice 2 black arrows that represent the entry points of migratory birds in the region. Multiple species of raptors, primarily black kites, enter the Indian subcontinent and are known to consume enormous amount of poultry remains. If that was not enough, to ring threat bells about potential spillage of zoonotic diseases, the migratory birds also include waterfowl taxa, like many of the geese, that well interact with backyard subsistence poultry farming by millions of poor in South Asian region. Unfortunately, though, in this vital region that is potential zoonotic hotspot, we have poor ideas about what exact routes these birds take to enter into the subcontinent and how urban chicken waste and different type of anthropogenic resources impact these migratory routes, which has been shaped after the long terms of eco-evolutionary relationship of birds and the ecosystems they traverse while moving from one part of the continent to another. You may access cursory details about these topics from a paper that came out last year. In a nutshell, studies like Royal Veterinary College Hub's Royal Veterinary College's Chicken Hub project should also incorporate more than human and more than chicken approaches to weave how broilers and backyard chickens collectively impact sustainability of social ecological systems from regional to continental scales. There are a few talks on our YouTube channel that discuss aspects of cursory highlights I've just made. I guess both Offley and I would be happy to take wonderful questions from all of you. Thanks a lot for your patience and take good care of yourself.